Minnesota has always looked calm from the outside, quiet lakes, small town streets, and the kind of Midwest charm people romanticize. But behind that picture-perfect surface, something far darker has been building for nearly 2 decades. A hidden network of gangs, interstate drug pipelines, and violent feuds has quietly turned the state into one of the Midwest's most unexpected battlegrounds. What started as small street crews has evolved into organized operations with roots stretching from Chicago to Tennessee. Shootings erupt in broad daylight, rival groups ambush each other outside hospitals, and entire neighborhoods get pulled into wars most people never even hear about. Because while the world sees Minnesota's legends, Prince, Dylan, Puckett, law enforcement has been watching another story unfold. One that's darker, one that's relentless, one that refuses to stay hidden any longer. And once you see what's really been happening here, it's impossible to look at this state the same way again. For decades, Minnesota carried a reputation that felt almost untouchable. A place of musicians who shaped global culture, from Prince's electric purple sound to Dylan's poetry. Home to the Mayo Clinic, legendary ballparks, and lakes that stretch into the horizon. To outsiders, it looked like a state defined by calm streets, humble towns, and that famous Midwest friendliness. But beneath that image, something else was taking shape. Quietly, gradually, and completely unnoticed by most of the country. While crowds packed concerts and tourists snapped photos along the Mississippi, law enforcement was starting to see a very different pattern. Organized crews moving in silence, testing new routes, and studying the weaknesses of a state that didn't yet realize it was becoming a gateway. Minnesota's peaceful image became its greatest vulnerability. Small towns weren't prepared, suburbs didn't expect it, and big city departments were suddenly facing criminal networks that looked nothing like the local troublemakers they were used to. The shift didn't happen overnight, but once it started, it spread fast. And it all began with the arrival of one influence that changed everything. The turning point came when Chicago's gang networks realized Minnesota wasn't just open territory, it was profitable territory. Word spread fast. The same product that sold for scraps in Chicago could flip for 3 to 4 times the price in cities like Duluth, St. Cloud, and Minneapolis. Fewer rival crews, less police saturation, and a population that had no idea what was coming made the state the perfect testing ground. That's where the LAFA faction, loyal, always, forever active, stepped in. A branch tied to the gangster disciples, known in Chicago for their discipline, brutality, and willingness to enforce territory with zero hesitation. When they moved north, they didn't soften their methods. They brought everything with them. Stash apartments popped up in quiet neighborhoods. Drugs were funneled up I-35 and repackaged inside hidden units before hitting local streets. Burners, lookouts, intimidation tactics. Minnesota wasn't dealing with casual dealers anymore. This was a structured pipeline, run with the same precision used in Chicago's toughest neighborhoods. And the violence didn't stay behind, either. LAFA's reputation followed them, reshaping entire pockets of Minnesota almost overnight. But Chicago's influence didn't just build a pipeline, it sparked something even worse. Because once one crew claimed territory, another crew pushed back. And that tension ignited one of the most relentless feuds the state had ever seen. When Chicago crews expanded north, Minneapolis didn't stay quiet. Local street groups had already been forming their own identities, and 2 of them would end up shaping an era of violence the city still feels today, the highs and the lows. Their territories sat just across West Broadway from each other, a single avenue splitting neighborhoods that lived in 2 very different worlds. What started as tension over corners and respect grew into something far more volatile. Retaliation became routine, every shooting sparked another, and every summer felt like the fuse was already lit. Open-air drug markets appeared along West Broadway, drawing younger recruits who were pulled into the feud before they even understood it. The highs pushed north, the lows held the south, and the line between them turned into a battleground where a wrong look, a wrong street, or even a wrong friend could pull someone into the conflict. Some of the most chaotic moments happened right in public. Drive-bys on crowded blocks, barbershop attacks, and even a hospital lockdown when members tried to confront rivals inside HCMC. It wasn't random, it was calculated. Each move was part of a cycle that kept spinning faster, dragging in anyone who got too close. For law enforcement, it became clear this wasn't a neighborhood dispute anymore. It was a full-blown war. But while the highs and lows dominated the north side, another pair of crews were preparing their own comeback, one that would pull South Minneapolis into the crossfire next. While the north side was getting swallowed by the highs and lows rivalry, South Minneapolis was dealing with its own storm. For a while, the 10s and 20Z crews had gone quiet, some members locked up, others laying low. But when signs of a comeback surfaced, investigators realized they were about to face a problem that wouldn't stay small for long. The two crews didn't ease back into the streets. They returned with a full operation, drug routes running through Franklin and Lake, illegal firearms moving in and out of the same neighborhoods, and younger members trying to claim corners that had shifted while they were gone. The violence followed almost instantly. Shootings tied to the crews started stacking up within weeks. One of the most alarming moments came when members targeted a rival near HCMC, triggering a lockdown at a major hospital. For investigators, that was a turning point, proof that this wasn't just local noise. It was a coordinated effort backed by firepower, strategy, and a willingness to push boundaries most crews never crossed. When federal agents stepped in, they found machine guns, high-capacity weapons, and enough narcotics to confirm what they already feared. The 10s and 20Z were rebuilding faster than anyone expected. And with summer approaching, authorities knew the violence would only escalate. So the takedown came early, before the crews could fully re-establish control. A sweep of indictments hit within days, pulling key members off the streets and shutting down the revival before it reached its peak. But as police focused on gun crews and corner wars, a different kind of operation had already taken root. One that didn't rely on territory or drive-bys, but manipulation, secrecy, and exploitation on a level Minnesota had never seen. While gun crews battled for corners, another operation was quietly spreading through Minnesota. One far more hidden, far more organized, and far more disturbing. It didn't look like a traditional gang war. There were no block shootouts or public feuds. Instead, it moved through apartments, shelters, malls, and interstate highways, all controlled by a network people later learned to call the Somali Mafia, the Outlaws, and their female counterparts, the Lady Outlaws. This group didn't rely on force in the streets. They used manipulation, grooming, promises that turned into traps. And once someone was pulled in, the crew moved them from state to state, Ohio, Tennessee, Minnesota, like pieces in a system that ran for years without being detected. What shocked investigators most wasn't just the scope of the operation, but the structure. Members played specific roles: recruiters, transporters, money handlers, and overseers who managed everything from phones they controlled to hotel rooms booked under layers of false identities. It was organized in a way that didn't match the typical street gang blueprint. It looked more like a business, cold, calculated, and efficient. When the case finally unraveled, it revealed dozens of victims, countless interstate trips, and a level of coordination most people never imagined could exist in the Midwest. The entire operation had been hiding in plain sight, woven into communities that never suspected a thing. And just when federal agents thought they had seen the worst of it, another series of crews emerged, this time moving guns, stolen cars, and narcotics with a level of teamwork that made even seasoned investigators pause. As investigators unraveled the larger trafficking rings, another wave of crews started building their own networks, smaller on paper, but alarmingly efficient in practice. These weren't the loud, territorial groups from earlier years. They operated like moving parts in a machine, connected through favors, shared enemies, and access to weapons that traveled farther than most people realized. One of the most aggressive groups to pop up was the Stick-Up Boys, a crew known for fast hits, quick escapes, and a willingness to target anyone, rivals, strangers, even associates who stepped out of line. They teamed up with members from 1-9, blending their operations into a loose partnership that made them unpredictable. If a robbery happened in Minneapolis on a Tuesday, The same crew could be linked to a shooting in St. Paul by Thursday. There were no boundaries, no pattern, and that made them dangerous. But they weren't alone. The Black Pea Stones were running their own pipeline into Minnesota, pushing product through contacts in Chicago, then feeding it into cities like St. Cloud. Their setup was less chaotic but more rooted, connections built through family ties, long-standing alliances, and a structure that echoed the old-school gangs from decades earlier. The biggest problem? The guns. Authorities traced firearms between all three groups, discovering weapons bouncing from burglary crews to drug networks to violent offenders in a matter of weeks. One pistol could be used in a robbery, traded for narcotics, then recovered after a shooting states away. The circulation was constant, and every new case connected to another web of names. Just as law enforcement started piecing together these networks, another shock hit the state. Violence spilling into areas most people believed were completely off-limits. For years, Minnesotans believed certain places were untouchable: coffee shops packed with students, late-night food spots in Dinkytown, and the bright downtown blocks where crowds moved from bars to concerts